So, if I can pick it up, I finished my research document. I'm really proud of how it looks. I feel like it came together really well from the last version. Apologies if there's any background noise, my cat is in here causing problems. So it's got end papers. I have like a book of vintage end papers, and I found one that was in the right sort of blue and white pattern for it as well. So the final book is called Fragment, with the subtitle An Investigation of Ghostliness and Intangibility in Autography by B.M. Kinsman. Me. So I'm also going to show the previous version, but update from the version that you last saw on video. It has some text. So I went through and I decided to use post-it notes because I'd already selected the parts of my narrative that I felt were most sort of appropriate to what I was doing. So the quotes that I've taken for this book I'd already put to one side essentially. It was a matter of sifting through those and my original writing, which I'd discussed with Matt and Talia previously, and sort of deciding where those two things fit in balance and in conjunction with each other. And I actually found that somewhat easier to navigate because I'd assigned myself these sections that had sort of a thematic overview to them. So Abyss with the subtitle, and you can just see that I went through and I cut up all these little post-it notes and made sort of brief labels and placements of where I wanted certain bits of text and quotes. It's a mix of, like I said, quotes from the essay, quotes from pieces of work that I referenced in the essay, and then original writing that was in my sketchbooks in the development process for this project. So I went through and I just sort of told the story that I was already kind of communicating with the structure of the pages. You can see this is the version that still has all my like outlines for like this sort of cutout goes, and this is where other things go, and just overall like doing this so I could rearrange and figure out where I wanted stuff to go, because the version before just had like text boxes sort of drawn in ambiguously with an indication as to the content. So I just wanted to show that I did, you know, go through and develop that as an activity before I launched straight into the sort of final piece. So yeah, these are all over the place. I think there was meant to be one on the back cover, but it's fallen off. So it's a bit of a glow up. So yeah, Fragment. So it's an investigation of ghostliness and intangibility in autography, and it has 3 sections. Section 1 with my lovely little end paper here, which I'm really proud of this. It's just cut out from another page, but something about weaving that thread through the book was really important to me, and I feel it works really well here. Anyway, so section 1, Abyss, the woman in the mirror, which is a quote from my essay because that's the motif that I started repeating, which was where I sort of found my sea legs for this project, let's call it. So it says, my ghost is drifting, and we've got this sort of like candly thing going on. These are some of my quite early monoprints that I modified a little bit to fit with these later revelations that I had with regards to content, because I did find that my original monoprints were still relevant. It was just that when I was generating the content I was using different prompts, but then like I've managed to make them, I've sifted basically and made them fit in the narrative with the new ones that are sort of created for this whole woman in the mirror narrative, so it works quite well. Anyway, so my ghost, she's drifting over my shoulder, and then you've got sort of almost hidden me in the foreground looking at this woman in a murder of birds. I keep her in a jar on my shelf. There's a woman in the jar in these little panels and another ghost drifting over here. I keep her in a jar on my shelf, but she is always escaping. So so far this is all original text, and then in a different font to indicate another person talking. So I've got 2 different fonts and 3 different well, 4 different treatments because I have italics and then inverse text as well, but yeah. So, and this, well, I can actually see it in the reflection as I'm filming now, but it'll be backwards when I finish the video, but it says, "Passerby, I see you," and it's this woman in the mirror turning to sort of face away from you at the same time as the viewer. And then it says, "I hate my hair this long," in really messy handwriting, but yeah, these sort of reflective moments where it's the person in the mirror is a mix of myself and my self-reflection and this sort of otherworldly character who transcends the body. And then we've got section 2, realities. The pained and private realities of lived existence, which is a quote taken from Michael A. Chaney's essay, who I heavily reference in my essay because it was a really relevant work on the concept of mise en abîme in autography, which is like, wow, straight down, you know, what I was aiming for. I didn't really expect to find such a well-suited article, but yeah. So you'll notice that this one is where the quotes start, because this middle section, realities, is more based in reality, so it has more sort of grounding cut-throughs that take you out of this like sort of misty, distanced feel that the original has to it. So, I am in control of the fragmentation. This is a quote from Aidan Coke, which I reference in my essay. And this is original text again, so she says, and then in the italics and the alternative font it says, "I am an index of ghosts," which is a reference to the comic that I was sort of developing as an early form of this, and then discarded because it felt a bit hammy, really. And so the different font and italicism there is to highlight this other narrator who's both me and not me. It's almost as if the woman in the mirror is speaking back, whereas the quotes sort of live free of both of us, and then the unquoted text indicates my voice as the author writing it. And then, so this is another quote from Aidan Cook, so it's about, and then there's this image, and in my bedroom down here, which are these monoprints of what my bedroom really looks like. Sorry, my cat's being really noisy. And then we've got this see-through tracing paper treatment that layers over the original image to give you an additional composition and monoprint on top. And then this, in the woman in the mirror's voice, but still quoted, says, "It's about choosing between realities." So as you turn the page, you've picked sort of a new plane of existence. And then we've got these sort of bits of text that's kind of taken from daily life, like things that I end up saying quite regularly. So I work at a cafe as a barista, so "good morning" is really common, and you know, like, 1 second, I'll come in and do that in a minute, and I am on antidepressants, and sometimes I miss a day, and I'll realise like halfway through the day and be like, shit, I missed it. So that text is all original and is sort of from both my perspective and the woman in the mirror, because on one side it's reversed and on the other it's not, and it exists on this different sort of removed plane from the base story that I'm telling. And then again, in the woman in the mirror's voice, we've got, "I churn out versions of myself that I deem fit for public consumption," which is another bit of original writing that Matt saw in my last tutorial with him. And this is quoting myself from my essay, "I learned to let go," and you sort of see this sort of version of myself in a sheet. I know it's not very obvious, I think, to the typical viewer that this is a version of myself, but that's the way that I saw it when I was creating this. And then an advancement of that woman in the mirror again. Almost, it's a panel progressing, really. And then here we've got some backwards text. It says, "embrace me," sort of in the voice of the woman in the mirror. And then we've got section 3, which is dream, where the relevant quote is from Charlotte Sellerman's Singspiel work, and it says, "and she knew she had to vanish for a while from the human plane," which is it's a cut down version of a longer quote, which is with dream awakened eyes, something something, she saw the sun and, no, she saw the ocean and felt the sun and knew she had to vanish for a while from the human plane to create something truly beautiful. And so transitioning into the dream section, it's sort of about accepting this otherworldly feeling. So in this section of the book, there's a lot more incorporations of my earlier monoprints that I initially discarded and I put to one side, and I said, oh, these aren't really relevant because I did them when I was looking at different inspirations, when I was still quoting from songs and from poems for my sort of inspiration for the project. But it moved on from there, and I came and I looked back at them when I was sifting to put together the sections here, and I just put them to one side in the pile, and I was like, oh, they feel sort of relevant to this idea. But then when I came back to them and looked at them properly, I was like, yeah, no, I am proud of these, and they do fit with the narrative, so there's absolutely no reason to not include them just because they didn't fit my ideal, because they preempted the ideal, really. So anyway, and then there's more text. So this one's quite sort of difficult to see, and it says let go of control, and then down here, release my work into the overlap. That's me not being able to read my own writing. I have to look at it properly. My attention span's really poor right now, and my cat keeps distracting me because she's making noise. But it's okay. And then on this other page, this was actually originally written along to a My Chemical Romance song where the lyrics were, don't stop if I fall and don't look back. So this just says, don't stop, and it's these two figures, both with long hair, running, and then a close-up on this sort of soft line work monoprint. And that felt, you know, it wasn't generated with the woman in the mirror concept in mind, but this idea of the dual self and sort of pulling each other along and cooperating is really, you know, a good thing to include, that I enjoyed as it emerged. So this one is another quote that says, an intersection of autobiography and fiction, which is a quote by me from my essay. On the next page, some original writing for the research document. So inside, it's still timid me. And then this is a quote from Michael A. Chaney, I believe, which is also in the essay, which says, providing a home for the alternate self within her. Oh, sorry, I misspoke there. It isn't Michael A. Chaney. I wrote this. It's about, I was doing a critical analysis of Charlotte Salamon's work and how the self that she writes about in her work never uses her true name, which was both a method of protection at the time because she was being persecuted by Nazis, but also to sort of remove the character of Charlotte Kahn from the reality of Charlotte Salomon, even though they lived exactly the same life as she told it. So I thought that was, you know, it felt appropriate with this sort of imagery of pulling apart and being drawn back together with this other version of yourself. And then we've got, her work is an extension of herself and becomes her ghost. This is also a quote from me. And then this bottom bit is a quote from Michael A. Chaney. Definitely this time it says, regards itself in mirrors compulsively. So, you know, the ghost is always looking to itself, and yet another reflection, even though the ghost emerged from the reflection of the author in the first place. And then you finally got this monoprint of the one inside and outside the mirror reaching back, and you sort of realise that in conjunction with the previous page and that progression that you saw, was it ever really a mirror? Was it a window? And which side is the author and the character on? What distinction is there between them? And we get to the final page, and the end page says, foregoing distinction between history and fiction. And this is a quote from Michael A. Chaney, definitely. Which I thought was really this idea of a corrupted, unreliable narrator, but not out of a sense of maliciousness or anything, out of this refusal to cooperate with an inner self. Or, well, not even a refusal to cooperate, the cooperation itself produces that difference that's innate in everything, because there's always you as the author, and you as the narrator, versus you as the character who is living the story that you're telling again, because it's your history, but it's also the narrative that you're retelling. And I just love those layers. And then you've got this lovely end paper again, which I love. On the back page, a final quote, which is the last line of my essay. So this is a quote from me, which is, "Ghostliness exists here in the spectre of intent," which is sort of, so, I mean, that was my main takeaway from the essay, that ghostliness and intangibility exist in autography, so autobiographical graphic work, like comics, through the intentions that you as an author have for the work that you're producing. And I think the more labour that goes into something, and the more time that you spend with it, the more it sort of starts to take on its own spirit. I think there's a belief in a lot of cultures of, that's evolved independently of objects having sort of life breathed into them after so long being used or being, passed down through a family. And I just like that spirit of a home or an object that you've put a lot of love into creating is so interesting and just fundamental to this sort of exploration of the little bits of yourself that you split off that become fragments and ghosts when you create a new work, which is like, it just comes full circle. And I was really happy with how all this lined up, because I think I definitely struggled for a while on getting it to work as a project, and I pivoted a lot of times, but then having this 3-part narrative that embraces those aspects, abyss, where I as an artist was sort of in that abyss. I wasn't really sure what I was doing, and I didn't like identifying these parts within myself and all these layers, and then sort of being confronted with the reality of just the way things are, and all the research and the quoting and the hard-hitting stuff. And then that final section of the sort of dream, which is your desires, kind of, it's determined by a part of yourself that you can't access, but you still have to sort of live through it. You don't get to choose what you're dreaming, and I really love that. So the final version of this was the 3 sheaths of paper, the 2 hardbound covers with my end papers and things on the inside. I also did this little folded section because the hardback that I was using for this always ended up being a bit messy when I cut it, so you can sort of see that the edges here aren't very nice. So what I did was I turned the rough edges to the inner side and covered them so that they were a bit neater. And I think having obviously the labelled cover and then this sort of little border gave it such a more professional look. I think if I just slapped this straight on without the end paper to, make that pull that thread through the rest of the piece, I don't think it would have felt anywhere near as put together. But I've ended up with, a piece that feels really professional, and I look at this and I'm happy. It's like a labour of love. I mean, this project has been very difficult for me because I've not been having a very good time, and everything's been sort of going wrong all the time, and I never really got a break. But this feels like an achievement and like a turning point and something to be proud of, and I really enjoyed the bookbinding. And then another aspect is that I did investigate Coptic stitch, because I was under the impression that this was Coptic stitch, and then when I went back and I looked at all the books that I'd gone through that are referenced in my essay that I'd taken out from the university library, I went through and I looked at the examples of Coptic stitch, and it looked completely different. It was like this little chain going down these sections, each of the the holes, and then keeping them together. I think where I went wrong is I pierced through the whole section rather than, so when you flip it open to the inside you can see the thread there, rather than it just being on the first page of the inside. But then in terms of what Coptic stitch does, the only real intention behind Coptic stitch is that when you use it, the book can lay open flat, and effectively I've achieved that. So I don't, like, as much as that sort of added layer of spiritualism felt relevant when I was developing. I'm happy with the version that I've got to, and I also have not yet been able to find a name for this stitch, so I might have invented a type of bookbinding stitch and I'm really not sure. It's a little bit messy, but I mean I managed to replicate it 3 separate times and have this sort of neat little fishtail pattern thing going on, so definitely, you know, that feels like a bit of an achievement. Oh, and then the other thing about the cover was working in this monoprint, because I mean this sort of kicked a lot of it off, because I mean I had the page in my sketchbook which was the first Woman in the Mirror, which me and Matt picked out as very successful, but I feel like this was the first more ambiguous monoprint that was just this teeny tiny scale on a massive page with just the bits of texture around it, where I looked at it and I was like, something about this is so just like effervescent for no particular reason. And it felt, you know, it's nice to have this ambiguous figure be at the front of the book, and then as you flip through the book, every time you re-encounter this mirror, she gets closer and changes position, and the emotions surrounding this woman in the mirror are always, you know, forever changing. They're in flux because she's a part of yourself, and I'm really, you know, I'm really happy with that, and that was why I kept referring back to the Woman in the Mirror at the end of each section, because that way it wasn't, you know, a really repetitive book full of the same content, because I had the other monoprints, but she still sort of takes on her own energy and feels like an important part of the narrative. So yeah, I'm calling it a day now, but I'm really very happy with this. And she's not the one who is making trouble, but there is a cat here, so she should be credited as co-author, because she spent a lot of this sat up next to me helping me make decisions, didn't you? So yeah, that's all. Thank you very much. I'll link this on my slides.